Education. It is very easy to forget what came before when time is increasingly filled with the concerns of the present. Inundated with information designed to be quickly scanned, humans find themselves with only the knowledge of headlines. They do not have the time to consider the stories behind the headlines, and before they have the chance to delve into an issue to consider its full import, they have already been distracted with another. Supposed wisdom prevails, telling people to look to the present, not to the past or future. That understanding applied to the designing of individual societal life too easily results in an approach to endeavor that fails to take into account the lessons of the past and the repercussions in the future of current action. Events of the past, in the context of their existence in their own time, can only ever be partially relevant to the present. However, the relevance of those lessons can often be considerable, and in reading the history of civilizations, patterns are immediately apparent. It is those patterns that remain, even if the particulars of the events superficially differ. Human history is the result of the decisions that humans have made. While it is evident that human life has changed, it is also evident how little it has changed. In this time of unprecedented invention, unprecedented globalization, many might wonder if now more than ever before, knowledge of history has become irrelevant. In fact, precisely the opposite is true. Mankind's ability to affect itself and its surroundings is more powerful than ever, and yet human nature remains subject to the instincts, including the fallibilities, that have attended mankind's evolution since its beginning. The nature of the individual human, his desire to guarantee his own survival and that of his offspring and family, his tribe and people, has not changed. What has changed is the sophistication of his means and the type and degree of the competition he faces. Man lives in a world no longer crowded with wild forests, threatening creatures, impenetrable mountains, and expansive oceans. Now it is a world crowded with people, in which carelessly considered exploits have global consequences, consequences that have the ability to destroy evolutionary lifespans hundreds of millions of years in the making. Thus now it is more important than ever that mankind considers its history, the nature of its drives and ambitions, because now its weapons are not spears and arrows, they are artificially guided machines of war with the capability to disrupt the entirety of human life with one ill-conceived decision. Man's ability to do economic damage through greed, through recklessness or mere negligence has the potential to affect not only an state or region, but the economic well-being of billions of people spread over an entire world. Students learn history from books with well-known inaccuracies. They are then pushed to specialize in particular areas of endeavor that disallow the time to consider the import of the decisions and actions of which they are a part. This approach allows a repeat of mistakes made before, but with ever more destructive consequences. One of the most dangerous of man's choices is the extent to which he allows himself to be distracted, even from the most simple expressions of intuitive understanding. But mankind distracts itself in every way at once. On one front, it distracts itself from its own observations through rigorous attendance to the past, while on another front, rigorously distracting itself from the lessons of the past by concentrating determinedly on the present or on a future goal. In that environment, in that state of cloudy scurrying, man grasps for snippets of security. On the first of those fronts, he can take the security from the past. He can adhere to what has become anti-tradition. He can cling to the semblance of striving, simply by wearing a given cloak of symbolism. This is insufficient for true experience. This is the way of the mind that has lost touch with spiritual connection and so reaches for the trappings of it in the world of his senses. By maintaining the trappings upon his body, his mind is satisfied. But this pretended interaction will not provide the actual spiritual growth to ideally inform the basis of the development of the future situation. On the second of those fronts, he takes security from the present, actually convinces himself of so-called ancient wisdom that requires a shedding of attentiveness to all but the present. The practitioners of this way do not realize the origins or the logic of their own approach and so practice an absurdity of it. There is no wisdom in not knowing the past, only a lack of wisdom. To know the present, it is necessary to know the past. To choose intelligently for the future, it is necessary to know the present. The present consists of the results of ingrained, established influences that are only visible in their entirety when seen in the context of the passage of time. Forces of influence in the world and their offspring exist in the present like collections of crystallized particles arranged into present form, but their trajectories, and thus their import, exist more like waves that shift to find their expression, however it may be found at any given point in time at which they hold potential for influence. It is said that happiness, contentedness, can only be found in the present, and that it is found by discarding the content, that ascribes to give emotive and intellective import to the present. In other words, by giving up the notions of satisfaction and dissatisfaction through accepting what is without judgment, we find happiness. This understanding is false. It is false not because it is not true in any way. It is true that a degree of contentedness may be experienced through direct experience of a task. This is what it is to be in what is called a flow mindset. But this is insufficient to satisfy the requirements of positive evolution. It is insufficient because any activity can allow a flow mindset to be experienced by the person undertaking the experience. The flow mindset is a result of fluency with the task, nothing more. The flow mindset can be experienced just as easily by a person on a factory line as by a person riding a horse over open country, or by a smallholding farmer ploughing his field. It is only when the passage of time is taken into account that the true import of the activity, the true value of the activity, the true potential of the flow experience within that activity may be measured. It is only with consideration of the passage of time and with awareness of how particular manifestations change and interact over time that informed choices may be made for the future. This is important because manifestation inevitably changes over time. To disregard the import of competing influence on that change is to disregard the striving of the manifested spirit, first of the individual, then of the communities of those individuals with like mind. The origin of that mindset is in resignation through weakness. It is a survival mechanism rooted in conflict avoidance, but striving for oneness, striving for the complete experience of life requires conflict. It requires conflict with contrary forces that would compete for their own survival, forces that require for their own manifestation the resignation of individual and collective spirit. History teaches humility as well as pride. It teaches that mankind may take pride in its highest accomplishments, and it teaches that mankind must be humble to realize its failure in the highest accomplishments. Great accomplishments include the manipulation of environments to suit apparent needs. The accomplishment of this manipulation has required the development of learning that no other species of creature on the planet has come even remotely close to accomplishing. Further, through a degree of self-awareness, humans have come to a degree of moralistic understanding that at least provides a sense of a value system by which to choose. The highest accomplishment, however, has been consistently missed. It is the accomplishment of enlightened civilization. Civilization arises from the influence of collections of individuals upholding and disseminating and successfully applying sets of enlightened understandings sufficiently that they may govern ecosystems of endeavor. History, the grand tapestry of human life, teaches how fleeting and fallible the expressions of collective enlightenment have been. But never were they accomplished through resignation. Always they were accomplished through persistence of intelligent, objective purpose, and through dogged will and determined strength. And always they were lean by the time they reached the mountain top, and always by the time they believed themselves so entitled as to become complacent, weak and fat, they had begun to fall. The story of nature is a harmonious battle between competing elements in what is, with the exception of the source of all its energy, the sun, a closed system. The sun energizes matter through water to life. Life must feed, and life may rise or fall. The story of man has risen to self-reflectively perceive, to appear to choose. So it is not enough to live in the present and not perceive the past. It is not enough to strive for the future without knowing the present. It is not enough to simply strive. Nor is it enough to attempt to avoid choice by avoiding the import of the very real influences that compete in the world. Resignation is stagnancy, even when it feels like bliss. History must be known so that disharmony may be felt, so that unknown harmony may be conceived, so that striving may be directed. The individual, the family, the community, or the state, any of these that lose their sense of evolutionary context and perspective will stagnate and fall. Education is thus the foundation of potential. While it is thought to start in schools and to consist of the teaching merely of functional subjects, there is far more to it than that. Education provides the basis of expectation. It must apply to the entire functionality of the individual. Education is the process by which the potential of the individual is provided with the means by which it will stand. If the individual is not provided that means, or if the means provided are faulty, then the potential will be limited in its manifestation. The training of the individual must consist of both positive and negative reinforcement from its foundations to reflect the actuality of opposing influences in life, and to reflect the nature of difference between various potentialities. This is because the potential is either maintained or decreased every step of the way. It is never increased. Positive reinforcement maintains intention towards the ultimate potential of the individual. Negative reinforcement is the defense mechanism that protects against a weakening of that potential over time. The weakening of potential arises from two sources of influence. First, it arises because a positive reinforcement has been insufficient to maintain intention on ultimate potential. Second, it arises as a result of a failure of negative reinforcement to act against influences from outside that compel intention away from the ultimate potential. The individual's ultimate potential is set with the combination and balance of the parents' conceiving energies. Then it continues in the womb water of the mother. Then it continues in the environment it knows as it grows in the world. In that way, the combination of energies becomes the unchangeable constant, the baseline unchanging potential from which all else stems. The education thus begins in the womb water of the mother. It is there that the expectation of the being forms and the diminishment of potential begins. The womb water is the first environment in which the being, forming into its physical basis, grows. The environment of the mother affects the mother. It affects her own potential to provide for the environment of the being within her. Her womb water is a microcosm of herself. She is in her environment just as the being within her is in its environment. The mother, as a filtration system, will positively and negatively reinforce the totality of the environment within her according to her own ability to positively and negatively reinforce her own potential within her own environment. She is the primary agent of her child. She controls the maintenance of the child's potential to the extent she controls herself and her environment. When the child is born, its potential is either maintained or decreased further from its once ultimate potential. The relative imperfection of the environment surrounding the mother controls this determination. The child's senses continue to form impressions, and with that formation, which started in the womb, comes expectation. Expectation is the result of influence, whether sought, imposed, or inadvertent. Considered influence is the foundation of the process of education. When the child is born, its environment shifts. It enters into the sphere of influence not only of the mother, but also of the father. The father enters a direct instead of merely an indirect position of influence. The nature of the father will influence the child just as the nature of the mother influences the child. They influence with their presence, with their way of touch, with their level of affection and care, with the sound of their voices, with the degree of security or insecurity they subtly inspire through their interaction. In addition to the newfound direct influence of the father, the child may receive the direct influence of the extended family in all the same ways. The protection of the potentiality of the child through its education is determined by these immediate forces of influence, and these immediate forces continue to determine and form the expectation of the child. The education of the individual thus begins at conception. It continues within the womb, and it continues with every single experience the child has from the moment it leaves the womb. The child learns what roles it plays in the family unit. It learns what is expected from it, and what it can expect from others. It learns how that which it may expect may shift depending on its own actions. When the child reaches an age where it may take on its own agency, its capability will be precisely indicative of the result of the influences that acted to reinforce or undermine its original potential. The human child's age of agency begins far sooner than is often realized. From the time that a child is able to control its body to the extent of being able to mimic behavior, the development of its own agency has begun. When a child can understand spoken direction, it is ready to begin taking its small part in meeting the responsibilities of the family. The child that can mimic sweeping the floor is ready to contribute by sweeping the floor of the house. The child that has the strength to hold a dish has the strength to place dishes in a sink to be washed, or the strength to assist by drying those dishes after they have been cleaned. By nurturing capability, the parents uphold positive reinforcement of potential. By preventing the development of capability, the parents fail to uphold positive reinforcement of potential, thus leaving the child susceptible to forces that would diminish its potential. Once those forces enter to diminish potential, they grow before they are known. Negative reinforcement becomes necessary in an attempt to banish the influence of those potential diminishing forces. Positive and negative reinforcement are forces of governance and regulation. The child ideally learns never to need to be regulated. Indeed, ideally, it learns to distinguish within its environment what needs attention and what does not. Ideally, it learns to discriminate between need and want, and to require only the former. The child will grow into the world just as it grew into the womb and then into the family. To meet ultimate potential, the child needs to maintain its potential strength in that environment. To maintain strength within an environment brings into play opposing and competing forces. So the child must learn to compete with or correspond with those forces in order to maintain its own potential and to support the potential in others within a social group. The environment becomes exponentially more complex as a child leaves the security of its family to navigate a world of hitherto unmapped variables. So the child must be eased into that world from the earliest stages, eased into it from the security of the arms of its father, of its mother. The child should remain quiet and watchful. The child should observe the manner of its parents. The parents should allow the child from the protected space of their arms to see the actuality of the wider world. The child should come to know birth, life, and death from the beginning. The child should know of good and bad, how bad is the absence of good, how all is bad that is not good, how nothing but nothing is good. The child should know that it must thus strive for the good, to rid itself of susceptibility to the bad, and when striving for the good is insufficient to rid itself of susceptibility, it must already have learned to fight. In the present age, education is taken to be capable of being distilled into the virtual academic learning of subject matter. The limitation of the concept of education in this way is the passing of influence to that which would limit and control the potential of individuals on a collective scale. It represents the forces of inertia, the forces of resignation, the forces that create slave mentality. Education should uphold before all else the establishment of verifiable objective truth. The truth must apply to the guidance of individual perspective, of familial perspective, of community perspective. The truth must allow for the reality of imperfection, but also must not be distorted such as would encourage imperfection. Education should thus be stern. The child should know stern parents, stern teachers, stern employers. The sternness should not be without empathy, as all must address any given situation from where they are, which is not where they might ideally be. All are imperfect, and yet to acknowledge imperfection, to accept imperfection, is not the same as encouraging it. Imperfection must not be encouraged as a result of false understanding and short-sighted patience. The child's energy, its learning, must thus be channeled and guided. It must be channeled and guided in the strictest sense towards physical, emotional, intellectual, and imaginative capability. The child must see pursuits to those ends honored in their environment. They must see their parents honor pursuits to those ends. They must understand that there is no choice. They must not, as a matter of negative reinforcement, even see anything to the contrary be allowed by their parents into their world. They must know what the parents shun and why. Thus it is that the ideal requires parents that are themselves ideal. To describe the ideal is not to assume or expect the ideal. Parents are imperfect. They were raised by imperfect parents into an imperfect world. Traits of ancestors, of past lives, are carried forward over generations to cast their shade over the child. The public school system cannot be expected to be capable of correcting the errors of parents. The public school system merely reflects a median of wisdom and capability of the populace it serves. The result is a homogenization through social integration at the median of potential. The median will draw on those attending like a magnetic force. Such is the strength of impetus to comply with social norms. It is precisely that strength that informs the realization that norms must be tested and chosen if potential is to be achieved. In the cultures that gave rise to the Western world, those that would rule were socialized into boarding schools from the age of 7 and were expected to act as if adults from the age of 13. Those of other classes lacked the opportunity of study and would be employed in support of the family. Considerations in opposition to that history looked at the most distorted cases to justify their upholding of the protection and extension of childhood. For children around the world, their contribution may be in helping with smaller children, helping on the farm, helping in the shop. It was not all industrial sweatshop child labor, and the fact of such labor is an insufficient basis for removing children from the realities of life. However, the nature of life is that people specialize into the areas of their expertise. The result is that very few parents are in a position to teach their children much more than their approach to life in general and their own area of expertise. The child that learns its parents' area of expertise is at a competitive advantage in that area as a result of having been steeped in it. Specialization is not always conducive to enlarged perspective, though, and ideal consideration of potential, whether individual or collective, goes far beyond the successful maintenance of a profession or trade. Regardless of the quality of parenting, schools provide an opportunity to correct for parents' imperfections. The threat to a child's potential as a result of their own parents' fallibility might thus be alleviated by a more enlightened approach provided by a school. It is this mechanism that allows the possibility that children from dire situations may still achieve despite their parents. On the basis of the low-level general average of human intelligence, resulting from manufactured environments that stifle rationality through inundation with stupidity for purposes of control, the importance of the role of the school is increased. The ideal of the school is to establish the child as conversant in the current state of the species' knowledge, and then to funnel the child towards pursuits where that child, as an adult, will be best able to contribute to the community through the achieving of its own potential. The less than ideal school resigns itself to a lazy presentation of information that purports to truth but allows little expectation of meaningfully serving any ideal, and thus simply looks to feed the established norm of the moment regardless of its ultimate wisdom or its ultimate cost to individual collective potential. This is the reality, to one extent or another, of almost every school, no matter their funding. There are thus 5 aspects to be considered regarding education. The establishment of the governance of body towards fitness and diverse capability as a basis for understanding the governance of mind, the establishment of the ability in children to integrate and navigate social interaction in pursuit of fitness and capability, the establishment of skills of learning, the establishment of conversance in the state of mankind's knowledge, and most importantly, the establishment of the primacy of enlightened objectives towards which all thought and action should be directed. Education cannot be considered to start and finish at the doors of the school. The child must understand for what it learns. The child must understand the principle behind the education, that it is to strive, that it is to choose, that it competes, and not for the empty sake of competition, but for the life of the species. Education is what is learned through influence. Influence is not always beneficial. It must be governed, even regulated. It must be picked through and considered for what it represents, what its objective is, whether it should be strengthened or shunned. Education must be understood to continue beyond school, beyond childhood. The works of the greatest minds are considered at a time when the individual has no experiential concept of the situations described, and then those works are set aside to never be touched by that person again. Education should consist of reading the works of the greatest minds, but not just in school, not just in childhood. Education must be understood to include the experience of everything the individual comes into contact with, and the mechanisms of education, the consideration of whole and parts, of origin and end, should all come into play. Only then will the adult be in a position to rationally consider a choice in an election, in a marketplace, in the raising of their own children. Education is founded in respect and in dignity. It is an appreciation of those who strove before for something better for man. Thus, education must be stern. It must be stern because there is more at stake than simply the enjoyment of the child, the delight of the child, the happiness of the child, the enjoyment of the security earned by others. There are as many outcomes for the societies of the world as there are societies in the world. Those societies must all make choices as to what they wish to uphold, so that they may live as they would like to live. To make choices and then establish them, the society must be informed and integrated. If, through a lack of education, the society is neither informed nor integrated, then the society will be vulnerable to other competing forces, which may undermine or even extinguish individual or collective potential. Where the potential, individual or collective, that is put at risk is great, such a threat must be considered abhorrent and must be fought as if for life.